right, good morning everybody, or afternoon now I suppose. I wanted to start off today by saying you survived your first week, and you all did a really great job. So fielding the emails from this weekend, quite frankly, really minimum number of issues. And given that there's always, even in a normal year, there's always some kind of tech issue, this really was not out of the ordinary. And so given that you guys are really dealing with some kind of extraordinary circumstances this year, I think that everyone is really doing an extraordinary job. In fact, I think given some of the issues that I would normally see, that you are fielding things better than an average freshman class would. And so you really should be giving yourself some pats on the back, because this is really, really going well, dealing with some of the things that you guys have to deal with. So I wanted to say that I'm really proud of you guys and how well that you're dealing with everything. So great job on that. The other thing I wanted to point out is we're in week 2 now, right? So I wanted to make sure that everyone was keeping up on everything that was going on. So you see, you see on the screen in front of you, I have our eLearn page up, and it's week 2 now, so I'm on week 2. And so a lot of this obviously looks the same. So at the top we have our goals for the week, which are now content oriented. So you have what to focus on. Below that, we still have all of our red stuff. And so the first red thing is the outline for the PowerPoint that we're going to be working on starting today. And the items next to that are some helpful resources. I'll refer to the last of the 3 several times today, as it's a really good practice exercise. But you see that it's not a Dropbox, so it's not something that I'm going to collect for points, right? But the thing below that is, right? So this is in yellow, which means this is an assignment. And so you can see there's a date on it. Some of you have already started working on it, so great job. Okay, so this isn't due till tomorrow, and everything's due darn near midnight most of the time. Okay, so you can see this as a lock. This is just telling us to do the thing above it. Okay, but this is our first assignment that's going to be helping us work on building the research paper. Okay, so remember, that's not for many moons yet, but we do have several things that are going to help us work towards it. So this one is going to have us working, listen, I did not, have us working towards what is a research paper. Okay, so looking at how do we find peer-reviewed papers and what should we expect the content inside them to be. So what's in an introduction, what's in the methods. Could you, are you just having a nervous breakdown? Let's go back, buddy. So what it's going to do is have you go through how do we find these things, and then it'll have you download and read a short research paper that's already completed. What I recommend when you do that is to actually download and save the paper, or if you're a paper person, to print it off so you have a copy of it. So when you get to the quiz part, that you have it readily at hand, right? Because the quiz is going to ask you things like, what did you find in the results section? Okay. Some of the questions will be more general, but some of them will be somewhat paper specific. And my expectation is not necessarily that you remember everything about salamanders and trees, right? That's not the point, but that you're able to figure out what section has what. Okay. You note that the quiz only has 30 minutes. Okay, which is perfectly fine if you read the paper and have it. But if you don't still have it, then you're wasting a solid 5 to 10 minutes going back into the lesson and re-downloading it again, okay, which is not something that you want to do. So just make sure that you do that, because that's an easy pitfall. So keep the paper with you, because that's what the quiz is about. Okay, make sense? Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Okay, so don't forget about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Mondays, usually my classes are
Without
online at
further
11.
ado,
I
upwards
just
and onwards. So
sign in,
on
and
Friday,
then
I
just
know what
wait.
day of the week we're in,
I
we
watch it
were
later.
talking about experimental design, and we had left off getting ready to talk about the different variables.
In class, I'll pay attention, but if
So
I'm
you
not,
have two different variables that make up your experiment. And remember, we had just finished talking about making a control experiment. So once you've made your experiment, right, we have two different variables. We have, oh, rats. I forgot she rebooted it, and I don't have Epic Pen up. I can't draw. Pardon me, guys. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Okay. We have the independent variable, okay, which I like to think of as the I change or I control variable. Okay, so if we think about the experiment that we were building at the end of class on Friday, what's the variable that I changed or I control? What's the thing that we were changing? Fertilizer. Okay, so I changed whether or not a plot had fertilizer or not. Okay, so that's my independent variable. Okay, the addition of fertilizer, presence or absence or amount or whatever it is we decided. Okay, good. Our dependent variable starts with the D. Okay, this is the data we're going to measure. Okay, so this is in response to whatever the independent variable was. So we added fertilizer, and then we're going to measure something that the fertilizer is going to make happen. Right? So that's our dependent variable. So in our example experiment, what is our dependent variable? What were we going to measure? Height. Good. So we wanted to know how tall our plants were going to get. So the fertilizer was going to affect plant growth. Feel pretty good? All right, well, let's give it a shot. Go into menti.com. Use the code at the top of the screen, my purple box. Okay, this will let you pick more than one choice if you think more than one is appropriate. And I want you to tell me, based on the definitions that we just made, which of these could be called independent variables. Okay, so remember, first up, it needs to be an independent variable. And then looking at all 5 options that you have in front of you, are any of them independent variables? Okay, you should be doing this both in seat and online. I should have more than 25 people doing this. All right, so let's look at this smallest to, or largest to smallest. Okay. Temperature. Is temperature something that I can change or control? Sure, right? I could build little greenhouses or incubate things, right? So I can control the temperature. Okay. Fish population size. Okay. Can I control the fish population size? Sure, right? I can set up little mini fish ponds and say I'm going to put 12 fish in this pond and 2 fish in this one, and I want to see what happens, right? So in that case, I might measure what food they eat, or if I put 12 fish in a fish pond, maybe whether they kill each other. Maybe it's the fish hunger games all up in here. Okay, so that one could be an independent variable. Rain. Y'all be dubious about rain. Okay, so can I control whether rain hits my plot? Well, some yeses and some nos. Okay, can I put little tarps up so rain hits some plots than others? Sure, I can do that. Okay, I could also make fake rain. Right, we can set up sprinkler systems in greenhouses. Okay, but here's something more important. Okay, is rain a variable that's going to change based on, say, adding fertilizer to something? Okay, can I do anything that's going to affect how much rain we're going to get? Okay, no. All right, so this is really important. I can measure how much rain we get, but I'm never going to affect how much rain we're going to get. Okay, so if we picture something like stem length, right, so this was our dependent variable from the previous, right, this was our fertilizer one. Okay, this was our dependent variable because we were measuring this. When we were measuring this because we expected fertilizer was going to alter stem length, right? Make sense? This fertilizer was our independent variable, right? We were changing that. And we expected that the fertilizer was potentially going to change stem length. So that was our dependent variable, was dependent on whether we added fertilizer or not. Okay, when we look at rain, okay, is rain going to be dependent on anything? Right, I can add fertilizer, not add fertilizer. I can do a cool little rain dance. I can plow the field, not plow the field, build a house, not build a house. There's nothing I can do that's going to decide whether it's going to rain or not. It's going to drought, it's going to drought. It's going to flood, it's going to flood, right? So I can't control whether it's going to rain or not. It's not dependent on anything. Okay, I can stop it from raining on my plot, okay, but it's not dependent. It's not affected by other things. Does that make sense? Does everybody see the difference there? Okay, so we won't get more or less rain because of something we're doing. So it's not in response to us. I can block it out, put a tent up, you can put an umbrella up. Okay, but our experiment is not going to increase or decrease the amount of rain. Okay. What about growth rate? What is growth rate? Say again? The rate at which something grows. Okay, in other words, growth over time. Right? So is that an independent or a dependent variable? It's dependent, right? So I can measure my growth rate, okay, in response to how much you feed something, how hot it is if it's a plant, right? How much sun you're giving it, okay? But I can't change that. I can't dictate. I can't tell a plant you should grow this fast and you should grow this fast, right? I can't control that up front. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay. What about fish population size? Can that also be a dependent variable? Sure, right? Okay, if I put 5 fish in every tank, and I give some fish a lot of food and other fish not a lot of food, right? We might expect, right, the fish that didn't get a lot of food, some fish are gonna die, right? And that's something we can measure, okay? The fish that the tank that died, okay, there's less fish in that, but that was in response to not feeding them, right? They all started with the same number of fish. Okay, so that's a dependent variable. That was something that was in response to that I measured from doing my independent variable. How much food did I put in? That was what I controlled. Or I changed. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that was kind of a tricky one. Not one you probably wouldn't see on a test. Does it make sense how we worked through it? Okay. The rest of these are very straightforward. Okay, they were one or the other. But our fish is tricksy. All right. Okay. So the last thing we need to talk about before we move on is one more piece that you'll need in order to do your lab this week. And theoretically, you've already dealt with this a little bit because you've all been working diligently on your checks lab, which you need to have done before you go to lab, either tomorrow or Thursday, okay? And so in that is a discussion on hypotheses, oh, that word's hard, hypotheses, laws, and theories. Okay, so one of the main problems with hypotheses, laws, and theories is that all of these words have other meanings, either colloquially or in other fields of study. And it ends up sort of muddying what the meanings mean in science. And so having a really clear understanding about what the terms mean here is very important. Okay, so let's look at just hypothesis and then hypothesis versus law. So we talked about hypothesis some. That word's getting harder to say the more I say it. When we were looking at experimental design. Okay, so what was our definition when we were looking at hypothesis? What is a hypothesis? A well-educated guess. And what is that educated part based on? Research and background. Good. So it's a well-researched guess, right? That's falsifiable and testable. Okay. How does that compare to a law? And not the kind that our politicians are doing such a bang-up job with.
It's just something that has been tested a lot of times and has been proven over and over again, so you can say that it's true.
That's great, right? So one of the key features here is that, well, you can prove or disprove a hypothesis, right? So that's still there, but the law has more backing behind it because you've done it multiple times, and this is the key feature here. All right, so a law is repeated experiment. So a hypothesis, you do hypotheses, right? You take a hypothesis, you can do a little bit of research, and you will do an experiment. You'll do this many times in college, okay? It's something that one person or a small group of people can do. A law, okay, that's a whole different story. Okay, a law takes multiple people, okay, or multiple times over a lifetime or a career in order to establish. So you need lots and lots of experiments and lots of tests. Okay, but the benefit of doing that, okay, is you get more than this is what it meant out of it. Okay, so we think of something like the law of gravity, okay, which says this is how a falling object is going to behave. Okay, whether I'm sitting in this room or I'm sitting on top of a mountain, I'm sitting in space. Okay, I have enough information in that equation to understand how something is going to behave. Okay, Boyle's law, which is telling me how pressure and gas behave. Okay, whether I'm sitting in this room or on top of a mountain or underwater. Okay, so having all of these tests together lets me apply this information to things that haven't happened yet. Okay, so things like Boyle's law helps us put divers underwater because we know how gas exchange works in pressurized environments. Okay, now I can't take Boyle's law and do anything with rocket fuel, right? It still only works with gases, not combustion. Okay, but okay, it's still really valuable, albeit specific. Make sense? Okay, so we're seeing a trend here. Let's see on screen. Okay, that's a word. All right, so we're moving from the smallest experiment and the smallest applicability to the largest. So what does that mean that a theory is? Good. In fact, exactly. A. Okay. So our goal here is to be able to explain something more general or more broad. Okay, but if you're going to go bigger with it, okay, like we learned from our inductive reasoning example, you need to have more. Okay, so in this case, we're going to have lots of laws, which we already know have a lot in them, and then we'll have lots of just individual hypotheses and tests, all pooled together to try to tell one big story. Okay, so one really good example of this that we've already encountered quite a bit of is cell theory. Okay, because we've already talked about this in some detail. So remember, we have several pieces of cell theory, right? A cell is the first level of organization that is living. Okay? All cells have membranes. All cells have DNA. Okay? When we get going a little bit further in class, we're going to talk about even more pieces that go into cell theory. Okay? All of those components were not figured out by one person doing one experiment. Right? That's a lot of information. In fact, it wasn't even figured out in one lifetime. We're talking hundreds of years were used to figure out all of these pieces. We continue to figure stuff out as technology allows us to see inside cells. Okay? But we have laws of how cells replicate. We were able to apply those in there. And so by binding all of these things together over hundreds of years, learning new things, throwing out the stuff that turns out was wrong, okay, we can put together this huge theory to understand how cells work. Okay, so it's lots of different people who have come together, some who have repeated each other's experiments, and some who have come up with new ones, to give us a really well-rounded understanding of what is inside a cell, how do they work together, how do they replicate, how do they move, okay, from start to finish. So it's a really big idea, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of people to make it happen. Okay, that feel good? All right, holla. That is it for this unit. Do you have any questions about any of the things that we've done in our introductory unit?